This is A Smaller Life, a podcast about making more conscious and more ethical choices within our crafts. Hosted by me, Saskia de Feiter. I'm a small business owner who wants to grow by going smaller. Together with local makers, I make tools, yarns, and accessories for knitters that want to buy less, buy better, make more, and make it last, keeping away the overwhelm and all the ridiculousness of over-consuming within our crafts. In the podcast, I endeavor to answer the question we ask ourselves before we start a project. What do we buy? Where do we buy? Who do we buy from? Or don't we buy at all, but use what we already have? Because when you think about what you do, you take more time and end up with less of everything. As a result, you'll get a smaller life. Super excited to share with you my talk with Mary Jane Mucklestone, who is a very talented designer. She focuses mainly on color work and then especially stranded color work and fair isle knitting as well. She also explains the difference between those two terms. We talk about what it's like to have a business in knitting in these days, about supporting smaller or commercial businesses in knitting, and she shows us a different side to what we usually get to see. I had so many questions still left because she's a very inspiring person and she writes books. She has now self-published with Line magazine or Len or Lane in different ways of pronunciation. She has very famous patterns like single patterns, and she does pattern libraries. She's amazing, and she's just a very wonderful person in general. It was very inspiring, very fun. She's a great and fun person, and I'm happy to share our talk with all of you. Mary Jane Mucklestone. Mucklejohn, I said. Mucklestone.
That's okay. People don't get it right often.
I always get it right, except when I start interviewing you. It sounds so Scottish, is it?
Well, I mean, who really knows? It's the name of a town in Staffordshire, England, that we knew nothing about. We just thought we were recent, 1850s immigrants to the US. And I guess we were. We didn't know anything about the town in England when I was growing up at all. And then with Facebook, I guess. No. Before that, we'd gone to the UK and this elderly gentleman sat next to my dad at dinner once and said, "Oh, yes, I remember Mucklestone as a child in the Midlands." So we thought it was something that didn't exist, but it still exists. And I guess, so we went there and it said that Muckle came down from the north in the 4th century and built his tun, which is Anglo-Saxon for farm. So it means Muckle's farm, like the farm that belongs to Muckle. However, when I was in Shetland, I was sort of lamenting that Mucklestone wasn't Norse because so much in Shetland is Norse. And one of my table mates said, "Oh, well, you said the 4th century. Well, it's quite possible that it could be Norse. And it would mean Mucklestane, which means big farm." So in either case, it means about the same thing. Either like big man's farm or big woman's farm or a big farm. So
that's funny. Yeah, because I thought it meant big stone.
Yeah. But the town didn't used to have an E on it, and my grandfather or somebody added the E in the States. So people no matter where you were, they will add an E occasionally. And so we pronounce it Mucklestone, but in the old country, it's
all right. I'm so happy I know that now because I always connected it to Shetland, and obviously with your experience in Shetland and Fair Isle knitting, I thought it was a wonderful combination of names and a lot better than my dentist whose name was Axe.
Oh. That's almost as bad as Nurse Blood. There was a Dr. Savage, Nurse Blood, in the town I lived in for the longest time. And
I think in the upcoming week we will see more of those names because we had this conversation now. It's so days. So Just to give people that haven't heard of you yet, which is possible for new knitters, not so much for knitters that have been around for a while, I think, because you have done quite a few things and quite some really wonderful books. And as a teacher, you've been places. So I have seen you around in many places. But if people haven't come across your work yet, can you talk to us a little bit about how did you end up to be a knitwear designer and teacher?
So both my mom and my grandma went to art school. So I was surrounded by, I guess, artistic endeavors growing up. And we also traveled a lot as a kid. My dad would have meetings all over the place, and we would just figure out a way to make it a family trip. So that's how I first started traveling so much. I went to a bunch of different colleges. Like, I wanted to leave the United States, and so I went to London, and my best friend was in Sweden, so I went up there for Yuletide. Went back to the United States, went to a small local art school in Seattle, and then transferred to the University of Washington and tried to study art and textiles at the same time. And when I was in London, I studied fashion history. So I was always interested in fashion, but I didn't quite know how to get there. I ended up taking a summer program at Parsons School of Design in New York, where I realized I couldn't toe the line as a very strict fashion school. Not many people would graduate from their program, and I realized right away that I just couldn't. It was like the disco punk rock days, and they didn't like join, but even though they did, because we would crash their nightclubs.
Who is we? Were you the disco or were you the punk rock?
Yeah, the punk rock girls.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
yeah, so I ended up going to Pratt Institute, which is for strictly art, and got a printmaking degree. Always worked in the fashion industry with like odd artist jobs. Painting silk for Oscar de la Renta was a seasonal job I had that was awesome. I'd ride up to the garment district on my bicycle with like the bolts of silk on my basket. I did jewelry design. I worked for small, what would be called indie fashion designers now. They were just like emerging. I became the head of the hand sewing department of one of them. Then I eventually left the city when I met my husband and went to Maine, where he grew up and lived in the woods. And I'd started knitting probably when I came back from London. My best friend who had been in Sweden was knitting. And so she was knitting continental style, which I thought was really cool. So she taught me how to do that. And so that was like from the time I was about 19, I knit on and off. And then when I went to Maine, there I was with lots of, cred in the fashion industry, but that did not exist where I was in the woods. So I became a waitress, but I would knit at night. I had babies. I knit for my kids. Then I got a job in a yarn shop. And I guess Pam Allen, who is Quince & Company founder, she was writing her book, Knitting for Dummies. And I became a stylist when she was the editor at Interweave Knits. And then I started publishing because I would wear the things I made. And she said, you should write the pattern for that. So I guess that's how it started. That was really long and convoluted. I'm sorry.
That is absolutely fine. And I think it's good information because coming from the fashion world gives you a little bit of a different way into the knitting world and sometimes maybe an advantage. It's quite a different world, isn't it? I also did the same, went to art school and wanted to do fashion, decided on photography, fashion photography. And then I decided this is not my world. I don't fit in here. Did all kinds of other things and then ended up as a circle back to knitting, which does still feel like fashion, but much more like me. Do you feel the same way? Do you miss any of the fashion industry things?
Well, I always liked garment construction and
Mm-hmm.
looking at all the details, which you would find too with photography, right? You're supposed to find what's the most important aspect of a garment, kind of, and photograph that. Although sometimes in fashion photography, all that matters is the mood and you can see the garment. For me, it's like to see the garment details. I love that. And I love the whole bits and pieces of fashion history and why certain things are certain ways and how fabric drapes on the body. And
Yeah.
in knitting, especially how elastic the fabric is.
Yes. What I love about knitting industry, knitting world is that the sizes are much more inclusive. And because I have a larger size, for me, I felt like I could step into that without any problems, which was fantastic. Me personally, I thought there was a lot of choice because I came from a place where there was no choice. Obviously, there can still be some changes we can still make it even better, but as a person that makes a podcast that's called A Smaller Life, I don't need too much choice. I'm good with to be able to knit something that fits my body, or at least basically fits my body, and then add to my skills to make it even better, because obviously everybody has a different shape, and the better your techniques are, the better it will fit, and that will take time and skill and all that kind of thing.
And I think taking pause and really looking at yourself, like you can get a lot of different circumferences, but everybody's shoulders are different, people's arms are different. So, I mean, when you're learning, you just often want to finish something, which
Yes.
is totally legitimate. But before you think that you've failed because the garment doesn't fit, you can sort of analyze why. Like, why doesn't it fit? Is it what
Yes.
part of it doesn't fit? And you can probably, if you can step away from the fear, you can probably fix it yourself. Just because torsos are different sizes. So I'm impulsive. So I start, I go through all the fun stuff, and then I have the boring bits. I just leave it there for like 3 months or something. During those 3 months, when you come back to it, you can really look at it before you finish and take it off the needle. Like for where I am right now, I suspect I knit the sleeves too long, and my impulse is just to finish it, but I think I'm going to take it off the needles and try it on to make sure. So
I think a lot of people can recognize that feeling where you just go on and think, it'll be fine, and you end up with sleeves that like end up at the tips of you.
Right. I always wanted long. My wrists are cold. But,
yeah. And so with knitting and what you said, the fabric of knitting is flexible, and it's very forgiving in lots of ways. In that way, I think the learning curve is not so steep. If you cut fabric to the wrong size, you're basically screwed.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
You can't make something bigger if you cut it.
Yes.
But in knitting, for most things, you can block things bigger. So you can get it wet and you can make it bigger.
Yes.
But you can make it smaller to a degree, but you have to be careful because you don't want to felt it, so it's no longer flexible.
But then you go back to the kind of being ballsy and just try things. And the stopover sweater that you are wearing now and that I have knit and I've made a cardigan, I've sticked it, and it was a little bit too wide, so I put it into the washer and I just tried it because I know the Lopi wool very well. I know how it behaves usually. So I just went along and tried it, and now it's perfect. So I'm so happy that I did that, because it's the difference between 20 seconds of courage and a sweater that you will wear much less. So yeah.
Yeah, that was good. You did the right thing.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the word is validated. So when we talk about fabric, your expertise lies, if I can say that, mostly in Fair Isle knitting, or I should probably say stranded knitting.
Yes, so that's more correct to call it stranded knitting, because Fair Isle has become a generic term for stranded knitting. But Fair Isle knitting is actually a particular type of stranded knitting from Shetland, and more particularly from the island of Fair Isle. So there's
See,
certain
this is
conventions they have. Yeah.
so that is actually new to me. So there could also be Shetland stranded knitting that is not specifically Fair Isle.
Um, well, they would call it Fair Isle, but the lore anyway is the technique began
Mm-hmm.
in Fair Isle, in
Yes.
the island, where the rest of Shetland was, their expertise was lace for years and years and years. And then the bottom fell out of the lace market. And so they took up stranded knitting in the rest of Shetland. I'm sure that all this stuff overlapped and happened at different times, and different families would knit color work, but it was something that the island of Fair Isle was known for, was stranded knitting. And there are certain conventions, like there's never more than two colors in a single round, but there are many colors. The patterns themselves are mostly geometric with multiple lines of symmetry, so they're easy to memorize. They were first noted on fishermen's keps, which are caps. So that was the ubiquitous product of Fair Isle, were stranded fishermen's caps.
Yeah, those the one with the long points that
Yes.
or
And they're
different. Yeah.
lined with just plain, and then they fold at your ears, so you have all those different layers. You have at least 4 layers of your ears. But I'm from Seattle, so I was asked to write my first book because I had done a lot of color work. And I thought to myself, well, they really should go and ask some ladies in Shetland to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do it, so I did it anyway. So that's how I got where
And
I am. So, I have an outsider's perspective, but I'm just curious about things all over the place. So,
yes, and I think as an outsider, you have a lot more information and contact with people that are from around the area than most other knitters. If you travel and you bite yourself into something, you can become an expert. But yeah, it's definitely a topic that is interesting when it comes to cultural appropriation and when do you I think that probably has something to do with claiming things, right? And we're not there. This is not what's happening. You are teaching and writing books about a certain technique and sharing that knowledge with other people. In your own designs, do you use mostly new ideas or do you take from the past? Hello, friends. I just want to say something to you quickly. So, if you're liking the podcast, if you're liking what I'm talking about, consider joining the mailing list. I have bi weekly updates on the podcast and or business insights and tips. The occasional exercise to get you ahead. If you want to actually talk to other business owners about the things that I talk about here on the podcast, why not become a Yavol community member for as little as €8.50 a month? That's like buying me coffee and a croissant. But don't do it for me though. Do it for yourself because I promise that you will get something out of it, either the emails and or the community. So you can either go to the show notes or sign up through yavol.myflowdesk.com/pattern shift. I hope you'll join us.
I say both. I like things to be fun to knit, so that's my primary goal. So I don't like patterns that make me have to pay too much attention. Ones that I can memorize easily are more fun for me.
Here,
Um,
here.
yeah, I like to combine the old and the new. If I see something old that I think is really cool, I will want to incorporate it in my own way. And then I think a funny thing is, speaking about your podcast in particular, is that the reason I came to Fair Isle Knitting is because I was a young mother with limited resources living in the woods in Maine, and I never had enough money to buy an entire sweater's worth of yarn. So I would shop from the sale bin, and I was tired of making stripes, so I started making patterns, which I called pictures. So I was making pictures. And then after I worked in the yarn shop, I learned about Fair Isle knitting, although I'd known about it in the 70s because of yoke sweaters,
Yeah.
um, and living in London. I so anyway, it turned out that that's what I was doing all along,
Mm.
was this stranded knitting, because you can use up all your bits. And I didn't know anything about yarn weight at that time, so I would mix things with, I thought, really good results. So it's part of what you said about being brave.
Yeah.
You can mix stuff. I now, because I teach and I design, I always say you should do swatches just so you'll know what the fabric becomes. But you can really go for it, you know? And if you're not afraid of disappointment, you can always turn it into something else, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, say you shrunk your stopover, it could become something else, like you could cut it up and it could be little mats for your table or something.
Yeah, yeah. And that's how I learned knitting. I think it must be 20 years ago now already when the Stitch and Bitch books from Debbie Stoller started. It's been such a long time already. I feel so old. Um,
Yeah.
but then it
Those
was
are such good books.
yeah, it's really a good book, but there was a lot of trial and error because we didn't have a lot of the resources that we have now, and the yarn shops that were there at that time in the Netherlands were they were looking back, they weren't looking ahead, and I didn't feel inspired by those places, and that's part of the reason that ended up starting my own shop. But I think it's so wonderful that all the resources we have now to learn from experts from all over the world, and tying in with what you said before in one of the former episodes, number 9, if I'm not mistaken, I was talking to Anna Bauer. She is, I would call her the Mary Jane Mucklestone of Hunsestrik. she
I love her book.
she is awesome. Hunstrik is primarily Danish. It started in Denmark from exactly what you were talking about, people using bits and pieces and scraps and basically building their outfits from what they had, and like adding to it with color work and stranded color work. But it also had this political background, and it was feminist, and it was very charming. If you haven't heard of it before, listen to episode 9. It's very interesting. And I think it's also of all times. If you think about the Fair Isle, and then Hunsestrik is more from the 60s and 70s, and now we're back circling around to looking at what we're buying. Can we make things from stash? Do we really need more? And if we need more, where do we get that material from? What decisions do we make? And so I have it in a bag here. I have the start of a Vo vest, one of your designs. And I'm challenging myself because when I was in Shetland, I bought, I didn't know where to start with color. And I have a question for you later. So what I did was I bought dark, light, and medium color from every color family. I saved up and I just thought I'll go crazy without a plan, but to get like a full spectrum, and I'll see what I can do with that. Obviously, I cannot make an outfit or a sweater with returning colors because I wear a large size and one ball will not do
Oh,
that.
right.
So
Yeah.
I have to really it's not going to be a repetition of color. So
That's better,
yeah,
right?
I know. I love it. I love to let go.
That's what you get to do if it's your own knitting. So in my new book, I have a book called Fair Isle Weekend. That is sort of the premise is what you would take to Fair Isle if you were going there, because you can't take much. And it has a set of wristlets because I would always wear these wristlets and everyone wanted the pattern for it. And I would say, I can't write the pattern for it. It has 10 colors. And people are like, we don't care. Put the 10 colors in. I'm like, nobody's going to buy 10 colors. But I mean, the whole point is because you can use the 10 colors you have, or you can translate it to 2 colors. The point is that you can use what you have. And I mean, in kind of the back of my head, I think that's how stranded knitting probably started, was you want a double thickness fabric and you want to use what you have. And you can,
Yes.
right? You can break all the rules just because I don't know what Voves says it has. It has 5 or 7 colors. You can do it with, 500. That would be a lot, but you could do
Yeah.
row different, or you can just do it with 2. It's your knitting. You can make it. Oh, I'm excited.
Yes, exactly.
Yours is going to be
Now I really have to finish it. I'm excited too because I'm always trying to talk to people about courage and about letting go of your perfectionism, because it will take you so much further if you are ready to do so. I guess not everybody is ready to do it, but I'm a little bit of the tough love kind. Like, go for it, go for it.
Yeah, and I guess partly, so like I said, I worked in the yarn shop, and there was one lady who would come in and make Alice Starmore sweaters, but with all her own colors. And we carried Jameson and Smith yarn. And she came in one time and she had, like this much done. And I was saying, oh, well, we don't have that color anymore. And she just looked at me and she goes, oh, that's fine. And she just like grabbed a couple. And I was like, oh, it won't match. She's like, yeah, it's okay. You'll see. And I did. I learned that it was
Yeah.
perfectly fine.
Yes.
That she changed it midway through and then changed it again.
Yes, absolutely.
That was a big freeing lesson early on for me.
Yes. Yeah, I remember I had a guy come to my shop and he just started knitting and he said, I am going to do 2-color cable. And I said, really? I haven't even ever seen a 2-colored cable at that point. And I was in 10, 12 years at that point. And he did it. So I was actually saying I wouldn't do that if I were you, but he did it. He showed it to me. It was a little wonky, but he showed it to me. But he also told me it was not really motivating that you said don't do it. And I was a little bit, in Holland we say, he stepped on my toes a little bit, and I was a little hurt. But also I learned from it and I never forgot it. And yeah, I think courageousness in knitting will take you places. And as you said, you can start over. This episode is sponsored by AM Art and Stationery, a growing online business in handmade stationery items. Alison just uploaded new embroidered notebooks. Great for taking your knitting notes or to give to a friend that appreciate needlecraft as much as we do. The DIY pen pal kit gets my creative juices flowing, and Alison did all the preparation, and all you have to do is add your personality, and you'll end up with a super original letterhead and envelopes. Or if you're a bullet journaler, like me, you want to go and have a peek at her Bujo sticker sets. They're awesome. If you love all of this, but you don't really actually know who to write to, AM Art and Stationery has got you covered. For $5, you can participate in the Pen Pal program. Try to say that fast. When you'll be matched to another storyteller. amstationery.com deserves a bookmark because you'll want to check in regularly as there are frequent updates and new items available. Find AM Stationery on Instagram at AM Stationery and online at amstationery.com. So we talked about traveling. I think traveling is such a big part of your journey, but now it's not. How do you see your designer future when it comes to traveling and knitting and
Yeah, it's funny because I used to like I love to travel and I want to always travel and there's so many places yet to visit. I like to travel. Well, when I was a kid, my souvenirs were always textiles. So I love to just look and see what is produced wherever I go, traditional production and also what's happening now. Like what's the little local fashion people are doing and all that stuff is really interesting to me. But at the same time, I like being in one place. I love the comfort of my own little home and never going away. So I'm always sort of torn. And then beyond that, I'm torn because although I live on the East Coast of the United States, I'm from the West Coast of the United States. And all of my birth family is in Seattle. So I'm always torn. I always want to do the opposite thing of what I'm doing. So I think in a way I'm really excited about the world opening up again. And then at the same time, have a little bit of a reluctance.
I think when it comes to making conscious decisions, because that's what this podcast is about, as knitters, as businesses in our knitting industry, travel is also an issue. Like I did love to go to festivals, but when I still had my yarn shop, I had this whole article ready to post, but I was always scared to post it because I was always torn between two ideas. First of all, I think small businesses need an opportunity to show their work to the world. And because they're in such a niche, it's hard to find the right people where you live. I mean, from my own experience, it's really hard. Rotterdam is a big place, but all the knitters in Rotterdam that understand what I was doing with the kinds of yarns that I was selling was just a small group. But at the same time, that small group is so interested in wool and yarn and fibers that they traveled the world to buy. So they didn't necessarily buy all their yarns locally, although they were very conscious, quote unquote, knitters. So there's always that push pull thing going on where it's very complicated to know whether I feel that this knitting tourism that's kind of new for the last what is it, 10 years maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been a huge thing, and like buses and planefuls, that's not a word.
No, yeah,
Buses and
I think it's a word.
planefuls.
Plainful. Yes.
I like it. Let's make it a word. Planefuls of people going to buy yarn on the other side of the world. And then there's also you want to support the people there. You want to learn different techniques from different places, and I feel very passionate about sharing knowledge. So do you have any ideas around that? Is it something you're struggling with, or do you have answers for yourself?
So I do struggle with like the carbon footprint of travel, especially air travel. But at the same time, places I travel depend upon tourism for a big part of their local industry. Um, and it's a big change for them to have to like find something that doesn't require tourism. So yeah, and I don't know what the answer is except better forms, of energy. Basically
Yes.
you need scientists. And as far as local yarns from wherever you are, it might be really hard to find them.
Yes.
I'm trying to do like I like to hike. Well, I like to hike a lot, and I haven't since I moved to Portland, the city. It's harder for me to get out, so I have to like get in a car and go drive an hour to get any kind of a mountain. And now, so that in itself is like, oh my god, I have to like I swear to a lot, but I have to get
Go
in a
ahead.
car to go hiking. That's like so wrong. But there again, you do. So lately, I've started to try to go closer and not necessarily have to go to a hill. And I went to the site of the first woolen mill in the United States that was set up with espionage. The guy smuggled the plans out, and not much is left, but just, it's nearby. And so I'm trying to find interesting things that are textile related that I would want to see in my own backyard, and learn more about it. But even then, like, I'm reading more. There's a town called Pittsfield that, in World War I, got the contract for making uniform fabric for the Russian army. So even then, textiles were an international commodity, and it was made here, but it ended up in Russia. So, and even then, like in the 1830s, or maybe, like the 50s, the yarn was being imported from Australia even then. So it's not like just a new thing.
No, I think one of the most important things with being a conscious knitter or a conscious business owner is that you get information. And the hard thing with internet is there's so much information, but who's sharing it? Where does it come from? Like, really research and know what's what. Because I mean, just the fact that some influencer is saying something doesn't make it true. And yeah, get your information at the right places.
There's just so much to learn all the time, and just because new information comes to light also, right? Like the first woven fabrics, they're always finding new scraps in some bog someplace. So it puts it back earlier and earlier. So things that we think are true because we've only lived for this long become not true when more information comes to light.
Yeah, exactly. I think because lots of places where people came together to knit are closed and shops are closing, sometimes forever. Our knitting world is changing a little bit, and you can see things moving and shifting and happening. And I've started an online community. I've started the Conscious Knitting Club, which is a membership for knitters that want to learn how to make more conscious decisions. And Clara Parks has just started her new community, which is awesome. Obviously there's a lot more out there. What do you think about online versus offline? Can you really connect to people when you're online?
I think you do and you don't. Some of my best friends now I met online back in the early days. That's how I met Gudrun. And Gudrun Johnston is a talented knitwear designer. We take trips to Shetland, so we're part of the tourist industry. I mean, in the years that we can do it, small groups, and we do hiking. But I met her online on Flickr before there were the other things. There was Flickr, which was just taking pictures, which is, I think, how Instagram started too. I mean, for me, Instagram started just as on photo shoots, we'd have like Instagram wars where all of us, the makeup artist, the director, the photographer, everybody would have these like contests, like who can do the best Instagram. And so for me, that was what was fun about it, was that it wasn't work. It was just
Mm,
fun. And you took pictures of stuff that just was cool to you and maybe your peculiar friends. So for me, it's like, I guess with everything, this is a theme. It's a love-hate relationship where I would rather be in real life, but we all live so far apart that I'm grateful to have it now. Like I couldn't be talking to you otherwise, right? Meet
exactly.
you, which is such a treat, right? So then that
Same,
makes me
yeah.
want to like go to Rotterdam right now. What are the flights? What are the rules? Will I need a special yellow card? Because when we were little, we had to, I think still, you need your inoculations. So it was always a yellow card that went in your passport.
Yeah, I think the energy is different, but I also think that if you talk to your knitting friends online, that energy is totally different than when you talk to your colleagues, say that you're work in an office and you're online with your colleagues. So one Zoom call could be totally different from another Zoom call. Obviously you will still be seated, you will still be indoors, all of that, but I think our views have to shift a little bit and try to see the most positive things about it. I've made good new friends in the last year from taking a course online. They are now some of my best friends, which is amazing. I have never seen them in real life. I know I will. It's on my top priority list at the moment. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are afraid of the technique, and especially people from a certain generation. And I'm not going to say everybody, because there's definitely all around ages different people that do things a lot different. I have, what was it? I once tested on Instagram. I asked my followers about their ages, and from, I think, 20 to almost 90 on Instagram. That means a 90-year-old woman is active on Instagram. And I have some friends that are what I call young, in their 30s, who are so reluctant to do anything digital. I think we try to make the best of what we have right now. How do you do that as a teacher? Have you turned to online teaching, or have you paused your workshops and your lessons?
So I've been doing online teaching with Vogue Knitting, but I also have new jobs so that I'm not as reliant on it as I would have been. And it's another one of those things, like some people are really, really good at it and they get beautiful setups and their filming is good. Like you can see now my light is like so bad. It's like, how do I fix it?
Yes.
It's so bad. I have a light on, but maybe if I do this. So anyway, people are like better at it and I feel inadequate. I find
Yeah.
it's hard. My teaching is, I want to grab everybody's things. I want to reach into the screen and pull it out. I want to see what they've done. I want to be able to feel what it feels like. So, but I think it is just a little adjustment. And I think that the reluctance is sort of like people's reluctance for learning certain techniques in knitting, in that you feel like you're a failure because you don't get it right away. And like, my lighting, I don't have good lighting. So I need to improve my lighting. I just need to take the time to improve my lighting and figure it out. It's not because I'm
Yes.
flawed.
Yes.
It's just my usual thing of being impatient and wanting it to be perfect from the get-go. So it's a learning
Yeah.
curve. I think also, though, I have to mention that internet quality is limiting to a lot of people. Like mine, I live in the third floor of a 1830s house. Well, it's like the Netherlands. It's a skinny little apartment surrounded by my landlord's house. But where my studio is on the top floor, and the stairs are so narrow, you can't get real furniture up and down them. So it's a very peculiar, but very cute place. Um,
So you have inflatable furniture?
well, we've taken like legs off. It's the middle floor that you can't get stuff. I can get stuff up through my landlord's, so I do have a real bed. But I didn't at first.
I really like that
I did
image.
not have a real bed at first, but I do. Um, but it's a long point to say that the internet companies don't want to put a cable into my house because they say it's too tall and they can't get it up here. It's a monopoly anyway. So it's this company called Spectrum, and it's very bad and poor quality, even though I'm in a city. So now I have a cellular service that I just got. And in order for it to work best, I have the little monitor or whatever it is up by the ceiling. I can never get 5 bars, but I can get between 3 and 4. So again, I go
I'm very grateful that it's working today.
wrong. But like my aunt lives in Idaho, she would be a perfect person for people to see. She raises sheep and cattle, but she's so far down a canyon, she will never get internet. It will never come to her. So,
No, no.
yeah, boo hoo.
I think you are making a very good point. And I also thought about that while you were saying, I have to drive for an hour to see any mountain. I'm like, you're talking to a Dutch person. We have to drive like through two different countries before we even see a hill. So our perspectives, quite literally, are so different. And this is something I've learned over the last couple of years as well. When I say support local, some people don't even have a local yarn shop. So there's nothing to support right there. So changing the wording to support small business, support minority groups, support where the support is needed as much as you can, from the left side, from the right side, doesn't matter. What is doable to you and your space in the world. But yes, internet is such a luxury in a way, but also it's a kind of like a mind fuck. I swear to, it's fine.
Good.
Um,
When we get
it's
together in real life, we'll just,
Yes. Ooh, let's do that. Do you like whiskey?
yeah.
Okay. We're good. Swearing, whiskey, knitting, we're good. So, this is kind of a not the best example, but you see people in Africa that have nothing but are connected to the internet. That makes us think that everybody is connected to the internet, which is not true.
No,
And I'm glad you pointed that out. So that we have to think about different ways to reach people if this whole COVID thing comes back, shapes into something else, and
I mean, it should be a utility that everybody should be able to have, and it's been really bad in the United States because some kids can't afford it, and in Maine certainly it's rural and the service is terrible, and so those kids are left behind. You know, it's what you said. We have to support each other and support what we can and small businesses and take care of each other, really.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, so that ties into a question that someone in the community asks. That's Avi. How do you feel about those large commercial brands where the men in suits sell the yarns on the festivals for the business people? When you compare that to smaller businesses, let's take the little gray sheep that now have their spinning mill right on the farm, so everything is done in one spot. She just was curious if you have any ideas about the difference between supporting what brands and
So I do, and like everything, it's complex. I think we need the big brands. I think people also don't really understand the whole industry is that the big brands are not very big compared with corporate culture in other businesses. I mean, the big companies are actually very small companies, and we all need each other and to support one another, because if you stop supporting a big brand that gets yarn spun in Italy, then Italy will not produce hand knitting yarn anymore. They'll just do it for the, clothing industry, for fashion industry. We won't get any of that stuff. All of it is intertwined, and I think it's really important to support, especially like the little gray sheep, because they've invested in equipment, a mill. That's a huge investment. I have a friend, Janie Estelle, who has Nash Island Yarn, and she has her own mill too. It's a really hard business for everyone, from the big people down to the small people. The big in our industry is really very small. A friend of mine said when I started out, they're like, nobody's driving a Mercedes, like no one. So it's not like anybody's getting, you know.
not even the German beer bellied.
Well, so you guys see that. You guys go to that big festival, but that's not just for hand knitting, right? That is for a wider industry, right? It's for ready made too.
Yes,
So, and that's where you see
yes.
that kind of thing. And yeah, the factory owner in Italy, whatever, they get to go out to nice dinners and things. But yeah,
Nice dinners are not.
I don't know. Let's change capitalism. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah.
Do the best you can, because everything is, there's way too big a difference between rich and poor now. It's just appalling. I don't know.
Absolutely, yeah.
There needs to
And
be an answer.
yes, and if you're very fortunate, share what you can, whether that's knowledge or stuff, your time, or you can share more than just money, right? There's different ways that we can grow and come together. And
You can't afford the really, by their very nature, the small yarn companies are expensive because of volume. That's why the big companies can be less expensive but everyone has to think about what goes into it. I mean, it's the wool from a sheep that has to take a year to grow it. There's a reason for these things. And don't feel
Yes.
bad if you can't afford the really expensive things, you know. I used to buy yarn from the Goodwill, and you have to be careful because of moths, but put it in the freezer. You're not less than just because you can't afford something. So take heart.
Absolutely not. And it doesn't say anything about your ability to knit. And that is also ties in, everything ties in. I love that expression. We don't use it like that, but it really works in a knitting podcast. It ties in with the fact that there's so much free information on the internet. And sometimes that's really frustrating if you have a business that depends on the same kind of information that is distributed freely. At the same time, it's great that this is available for everybody, and there's definitely differences in quality, in the fact that if you pay for some information, that you don't have to research a lot of things. If you can have a lesson from an expert that talks to you one-on-one or in a group, that's a lot different than online. So there's layers for everyone there. And what I really would love is people for just to think about it, stop, where does it come from, and exactly that sheep needs to work and eat and walk around to get the wool to grow for a year or half a year, and then all the other steps that need to happen. I don't know, I just love information, and it would be so good if we can get all those points across and people can still feel free and happy to make their own choices and not be pushed into anything that they don't want or that they can't, but then they come from a place where they have the right information. I have some other questions from the community. We tipped on it a little bit. Daniela asks, how do you pick your colors?
Well, I see what I have. Yeah, it can be really impulsive, like all my things. So I have a lot of yarn. I have the actual dream come true that I used to wish that, oh, what if I could have all the yarn I ever wanted? And so I do. I have all the yarn I could ever want, which is makes it even harder. But I will literally dump it all out on the floor and then walk by and pick the ones that are speaking to me at that moment. Um, and take kind of like the color groups that I want. And then because I do Fair Isle work, I will do what you said, Saskia. I'll put them into color value groups. So not just in their hue, like maybe I'll first divide them up into red, yellow, and blue just to see what I have. And then I'll pick the ones I like and then arrange them in a value sequence, because when you have two colors, you want it to show up, right?
Yes.
So like down here in the camera you can see it. And for the viewers who aren't viewing, for the listener, if you choose two colors of the same value that look really different, like I've got a brown and I have a red, and they look completely different in the ball,
Yes.
but when I knit them together, you can't see the pattern because the value is so close. If you're going to go to all that trouble, you probably want the pattern to show. And your degree of comfort with the value difference is really up to you. I find that if the colors are so close in value, you can't see the pattern as you're knitting it. It's painful.
Yeah.
So, and you may be surprised. So then I swatch. So I choose the colors that grab me. Then I put value sequences together so the pattern will show up against the background. And then I swatch, because even though I've been doing it for a long time, I can still be surprised how the colors will work. And like what you're going to do, if you've got an all over pattern and it vanishes in one place, that's really not the end of the world. It might be a design decision that you could say.
Yeah.
So
And actually, what I found out through knitting a pattern from your friend Gudrun is that this really bright green, if you use it like in little specks on the ball, it looks almost hideous, but it has its place in the knitting, which is, these are just little treasures you find once you try and be bold, I think.
yeah, so I think that's a lesson too in choosing color, is like you may have your favorite group of colors and how you really love them, but when you actually knit with those colors, they don't end up looking like
Yes.
the colors. They often become muddy, and so you have to go beyond your comfort level and choose, like in your instance, a very bright green that you would never like all by
Yes.
itself, but when it is amongst the other colors, it takes on a different look and it is much more subtle. But it also, like they call it the poison in rug hooking, is you want one crazy color that kind of illuminates all the rest. It makes all the other ones look better.
Yeah. It almost is a little bit like it's not really a science, but it is when they put little things together and it's not magic. What's the word?
Oh, I don't know, but it's color theory basically, is that if you surround, like when you go to art school, you spend, a year trying to make two different colors look the same, or the same color look completely different, and that's what we're doing in
Yes.
knitting. We're
Yes.
just with color
Yeah,
work.
it's definitely, you're definitely taking the position of an artist. Yeah, so color is definitely something that is worth studying, and it's wonderful. I mean, for me, stranded knitting is my personal favorite technique because, as you said before, it has such an impact, but it's fairly easy once you know how to keep the tension right. And my brain really gets it. While for lace knitting, I feel like I'm inadequate, although I never really feel like that about myself. I think I'm pretty cool, but I'm not so good at lace knitting. But that's fine because I love this and there's so many other things to knit, so I don't need to. I want to know, I'm super curious because you've been really busy. There's been some new books and a collaboration with Modern Daily Knitting. Can you tell us a little bit about your latest projects and maybe your future projects?
So yeah, I have a hard time saying no. So when the Modern Daily Knitting ladies wanted me to do one of their field guides, I always wanted to do a field guide before they did field guides. So it was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And it's all Lopi yarn, so Icelandic wool, let Lopi, and I like to knit let Lopi at different gauges, and so they allowed me to do that for that book. That book is 5 projects that are done at different gauges. Like, so one is similar to this stopover that is a loose gauge for let Lopi, which is like an Aran weight, but I use it at more of a bulky weight because Icelandic wool puffs up and fills in. But you can also knit it tightly like you want for a pair of mittens, because I used to work with my mittens and haul wood, and I wouldn't want wood to go through my mittens. So at a denser gauge, you get a different fabric. So I think it's a lesson in you can make the
Mm.
fabric you want by manipulating your needle size. And it depends upon the yarn, of course. Lopi is really versatile that way, in a way other yarns aren't always. But you can experiment with any yarn that you have to get the fabric that you like. We're basically making fabric. Also, it you have to wash and dry your swatches too to get the true fabric. You knit it and then you need to finish it. So that's what that one is about. My Fair Isle book, Fair Isle Weekend, is just mine, and it's kind of like a travel log. It's all shot by Jenny Reed on Fair Isle, although one piece was shot here in Maine. And I I love that book because it's by Lane Publishing, and they made a really beautiful book out of it. So I'm very proud of that book. I'm also working with Vogue Knitting. They hired Nora Gahn. If you know her, she's an
Yes.
amazing knitter. She was like one of my knitting goddesses before I met her. And she's the editor in chief now. So I helped her on the first issue, and I'm still doing work with them, which is fun because I like to work with a team. Again, I'm a person of
Hmm.
contrast. I work all alone, and then I love to work with groups of people. And then I'm putting out individual patterns chugging through them. I have a new one that I'm really excited about called Windrock. It's color work, but it's sort of short and boxy, though you could make it longer if you wanted to. It's kind of a modern shape, and I use color work in a kind of, I think, interesting way of having a field of color of small salt and pepper within a section of salt and pepper in a bigger section of fleur-de-lis. So it appears kind of like intarsia, but
Ooh.
it's not. It's just stranded. So look for that one. It should be out. It already is April. I can't believe it. It's being test knit now. I'm excited about that one. And then I have like millions of things. I have so much stuff I just have never written down. So endless possibilities.
Yeah. So you're knitting on a day-to-day basis. Do you look at your knitting as a job, or is there a difference between your personal knitting and your job knitting, or does everything intertwine?
I would say everything intertwines. Um, Sometimes it feels like a job, and then sometimes it's just fun. Um, I'd say I'm where I fall down is regularity of posting, and like my poor website, it needs a little love, because if you spend all your time doing that, you don't get to knit ever.
I
I
know.
really should be I fortunately have someone helping me with the test knit, because I could never do it myself, because there aren't enough hours in the day. Um,
Yeah. So do you do
so
everything else yourself?
yes, and that's not a good practice.
No.
But
Yeah.
it's also in this business, at least for me. I live in the United States, so we don't have very many safety nets.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But you're always scrambling to make a living.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like you feel like you can never relax, because even though you're like fine for this month, or a few months, what's going to happen next year?
Yeah. And that makes it hard to make any decisions, like asking other people to do things for you and paying other people, because you kind of want to keep it where you are. And sometimes for me at least, that has been a difficult decision. I could really use the help, but I'm just starting to make some money, and all those decisions are very, very complicated as a one person business in the knitting industry. As
Yeah.
a final question to all the starting businesses and starting designers in the business, do you have one thing you would want to give them from your experience that would help them?
I would say to trust your own vision and try not to be afraid that you do have a good vision. And just because it seems like someone else has done your idea, when you came up with the idea, you probably didn't see their idea. Sometimes it looks like you've done something that's derivative, but it really did come out of your own head, and it's your thought and your ideas. Don't compare yourself. It's really hard not to. It always seems like everyone else is doing things better and more efficiently. It doesn't matter. You just do it your way. Things evolve, and even though you started out doing one thing, it might end up being another thing, and it might be the best thing in the world. So trust yourself and don't give up.
Thank you so much. Full of nuggets and tips for knitters and professionals in knitting. Thank you for your generosity. This was wonderful. I enjoyed it so much.
Okay. Oh, it's so fun.
Thanks. So, you guys, that was fun and so much information. I could have easily talked an hour longer. This time I asked people in the community if they had questions for Mary Jane. I want to keep this going. I want to make this a returning thing, because I think we are a community, and as a community, we can ask questions and talk about different topics. So this time we had questions by Jenneke, by Avi, Charlotte, and Daniela. So thank you guys for asking your questions. Sometimes I might have kind of forgot to mention your name, so I thought I'd put them at the end extra. Thanks so much. If you have any questions in general, or if you want to ask questions to guests that are coming, let me know, and you can leave a voice message on the show notes page. You can send me an email as well, info@wool.com. I'd love to have your questions in the show. So bring them on. See you next time. This show was edited by Ali McLaughlin. In return, I made an ad for her brand new website. If you want to sponsor an episode, you can get in touch via info@wool.com or select the sponsor tier on our Patreon page. I'm only asking for the cost to make the show at this point. So there's no cheaper way to get in an ad in a place where you reach such a specific audience. Lots of value for money. And the podcast is growing. It's in the top 100 of leisure and craft podcasts in Canada, United States, New Zealand, and Australia, and in the top 10 in multiple European countries. And at this point, I can honestly say that we're big in Japan as we hit the number 2 spot in crafts there this week. So I'm super excited. Lots of people that are into knitting and needle crafts are listening. So take the chance, reach your people, and spread your message. Get in touch to sponsor an episode for hardly any money. And let me know if you want to be our next sponsor. Thank you so much. Bye. A Smaller Life is more than just a podcast. It's connected to Wool, an indie yarn and tool shop from Rotterdam in the Netherlands, with an online community that's all about bringing back the consciousness in our crafting practice and businesses. The website is www.ja-wol.com. Find our conscious products, learn more about the free community, and sign up for our Conscious Knitting Club membership and our weekly newsletter. You can follow me on Instagram @JaWoolRotterdam. If you're a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution and becoming a sponsor through our Patreon page. If you're able to make a financial contribution, it would mean a lot. The show is free for you, but it's not free to produce. If you own a business that fits the narrative, I will happily make a mini commercial for you. If you are a maker, small business owner, or otherwise experienced in running a business with a conscience, or know someone that fits the description and want to tell my listeners about your experiences, get in touch with me via the website or send me a DM on Instagram. Knowing more and choosing with a conscience makes the world better. If you have any questions about an episode or want to leave a note to me and the other listeners, click the button in the latest show notes on the website and talk. One of the easiest things you can do to support the podcast is to leave an honest review on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice so you'll never miss an episode. And share it in your social network or even just mentioning it over coffee with a friend. I'm only one person and I count on you to help me spread the message. Thanks for listening. Bye.